Two movies opened on the same day in the same theaters across the country. The first cost $10 million to make. The second cost $750,000. For context, the catering budget on a mid-level Marvel movie runs higher than that. Neither director had ever made a studio film before. One taught himself 3D animation from free YouTube tutorials as a teenager in Petaluma, California, and the other made his breakout film in his bedroom for $800 and posted it on YouTube for free. No distribution strategy, no publicist, no plan, nothing. Together, those two films have now grossed over $570 million worldwide. And then a few weeks after those numbers came in, Google's DeepMind unit announced a $75 million investment in A24, the studio behind one of those films, to build AI tools specifically for filmmakers. Some people read that as the beginning of AI-generated Hollywood. Others called it the most strategic tech investment in years. Artists' unions put out statements. Film critics wrote think pieces about whether AI was about to ruin the one corner of the industry that still felt human. Welcome back to AI IRL, a podcast brought to you from NSF AISTM. I'm your host, Ariel Huang, and today we're going to slow down and actually understand what happened, what the DeepMind deal is and isn't, and why the AI story inside of it is more interesting and more relevant to how you think about AI in your own life than any of the hot takes suggested. Let's meet the people at the center of this. So Kane Parsons grew up in Petaluma, California, as mentioned before, and it's a small city, about an hour north of San Francisco, not exactly the center of the film industry. And he taught himself Blender, which is a free 3D modeling and animation software that you can download right now if you wanted to, and started building what's called the Backrooms mythology online. If you've spent any time in horror corners of the internet, you probably know the Backrooms. The concept started as a creepypasta, those collaborative internet horror stories, and it describes this deeply unsettling idea of a liminal space, an endless network of empty fluorescent lit rooms that look like the back office of a 1990s office building. The carpet is this specific shade of yellow, the hum is constant, there's nobody there, and the dread comes not from anything that happens, but from the particular wrongness of being somewhere that looks familiar but isn't. Parsons posted his first Backrooms video on January 7th, 2022. And within a month, he'd been contacted by multiple studios, not because he had sent anyone a pitch, not because he had a Hollywood agent, because millions of people had already watched the video and wanted more. A24 gave him $10 million to make a feature film, and that film is now A24's highest-grossing film in its history. It opened to $87 million in its first weekend, nearly 9 times what the early tracking suggested, and the total worldwide gross has crossed $270 million. The second director is Curry Baker, who didn't have an existing internet audience for a specific world the same way that Parsons did. But what he had was a sensibility, a way of making horror that felt genuinely internet native without being derivative, and a track record of micro-budget proof of concepts that he'd built through sheer stubbornness. His film, Milk and Cereal, cost $800, and he shot it in found footage style, released it for free on YouTube in 2024, and just moved on. Not as a trailer for something bigger, just as the film. It went viral because it worked as a piece of filmmaking. That led to a UTA deal, which led to the film Obsession, which he made for $750,000 and screened at Toronto International Film Festival at a midnight showing. The audience responded. Bidding war. Focus Features, owned by Comcast, bought it for $15 million, which is reportedly the highest price ever paid for a genre film in TIFF history, and Obsession has now crossed $300 million worldwide. Here's the thing I want you to hold on to before we go further, because it's the thread that runs through everything else we're going to talk about today. Neither of these directors needed permission to start. To understand why that matters and how it relates to the deal, you need to understand what the word Greenlight means in Hollywood and what it was actually doing underneath all the mythology around it. Greenlight is the institutional decision to fund a film project. A studio greenlights a movie, and if they don't, it doesn't get made. At least, not in any way that can reach a wide audience. And the reason studios had that kind of power wasn't really about taste. It was about distribution. Think of it this way, right? A film that can't get into theaters might as well not exist. And getting into theaters, wide theatrical distribution, thousands of screens across the country, that required the relationships and the marketing infrastructure that only the major studios had. A film could be brilliant. It could be exactly what audiences wanted. But if no studio was willing to distribute it, the audience had no way to find it. So the studios could effectively act as the taste arbiters for the entire industry. But this wasn't because they had better taste than anyone else. It was because they controlled the pipes. And the greenlight process grew out of that. Pitch meetings, development deals, rounds of notes, coverage systems. All of this was designed to filter projects down to the ones the studio believed they could distribute profitably. And what does distribute profitably mean when you need a $30 million marketing campaign just to open a film in 3,000 theaters, regardless of how cheap the movie itself was? It means recognizable IP, known stars, directors with proven track records, pre-sold concepts. Think about the specific shape of film that system produced, the franchise tentpole, the star vehicle, the literary adaptation, and think about the specific career path it created. Film school, short film, Sundance, studio deal. That wasn't the only path to making movies, but it was the only path to making movies that people could actually see. The greenlight was, underneath all the Hollywood mythology, an information problem. Studios were making educated guesses about what audiences wanted, and they were making those guesses before they could actually observe audience behavior. Because observation required distribution, and distribution required the guess in the first place. Here's where it gets interesting. When people talk about what YouTube did for filmmakers, they usually talk about distribution. Anyone can post a video. Anyone can reach a global audience. The gatekeeping collapsed. That's true, but it's actually the less important change. YouTube's epistemic change is this. It made taste observable before distribution happened. Before YouTube, before any of the creator internet, an audience for a specific type of content was essentially invisible until a studio decided to distribute something to them. A teenager in Petaluma who was great at making horror shorts had no way to show anyone that millions of people would respond to his sensibility. Studios had no way to see that audience existed, so they defaulted to what had worked before. So YouTube didn't just give creators a distribution channel, it gave them a way to make their audience visible to institutions before those institutions had to make any financial commitment. When King Parsons posted his first Backrooms video and 1 million people watched it, A24 wasn't discovering him as a filmmaker. They were discovering an audience that already existed and had already demonstrated what it wanted. So the greenlight decision went from educated guess to something closer to confirmation. Think of it like a clinical trial, right? Traditionally, studios had to launch a film, incur the full cost of production and distribution before they could learn whether audiences responded. YouTube made it possible to run the small pilot study first. The signal existed before the institution had to commit. This is a pattern that has played out across almost every media category since the internet arrived. Music found audiences on SoundCloud before labels signed the artists. Long-form journalism found readers through newsletters before publishers noticed. And podcasts found listeners before radio conglomerates figured out what was happening. In each case, the institution that used to control distribution and used that control as a substitute for actually knowing what audiences wanted found its primary advantage eroded by platforms that made wanting observable in real time. Hollywood got there later because theatrical distribution is expensive enough that the old model stayed profitable longer than it should have been. Now we get to the part that broke the internet. A few weeks after the Backrooms and Obsession numbers came in, Google's DeepMind unit announced a $75 million investment in A24, structured around building AI-assisted tools for filmmakers, specifically for pre-production workflows. Storyboarding, pre-visualization, the process of mapping out a film visually before you start shooting. The deal explicitly does not give Google access to A24's content library. It will not produce AI-generated films. That's in the official announcement. On one side, artists and VFX workers who have spent the last several years watching AI image generators eat into their livelihoods read this as the beginning of the end. If AI can do pre-visualization, what stops it from doing everything else? The fears aren't baseless. Studios have been trying to use AI to cut labor costs since generative models became viable, and the SAG-AFTRA strikes of 2023 were largely about exactly this, about what counts as a performer's likeness and who controls it. On the other side, tech enthusiasts called it a masterstroke. Google gets equity in a studio with a $3.5 billion valuation that just proved it can generate venture-scale returns on micro-budget films. Pure platform strategy. Film critics split between, "This is fine, actually," and A24 sold its soul. Here's what I think most of these takes missed. Scott Belsky, the head of A24 Labs, described what the partnership will produce as, and I'm paraphrasing here, active tools that stay true to the process rather than passive tools that simply generate output from a prompt. That distinction is doing a lot of work, and it's worth slowing down on it. Think about the difference between a GPS and a self-driving car. A GPS gives you information and augments your ability to navigate. You still decide where to go, when to stop, whether to take the scenic route. A self-driving car, on the other hand, makes those decisions for you. What Belsky is describing is GPS for filmmakers, not self-driving cinema. AI tools that help a director visualize a scene faster, iterate on a storyboard with less manual labor, explore lighting options in pre-production without hiring a full visual effects team to render 30 versions of the same shot. For Parsons and Baker, budget was always the constraint, not tools. Both of them learned on software that's free or close to it. The tools were never the problem. The problem was that certain things, pre-visualization at the scale a studio expects, full storyboards for a 100-page script, still took resources that maybe independent creators don't have. I think, and I hope, that that's what the AI partnership is aimed at. Not replacing the creative vision, but lowering the cost of executing it. James Cameron, who definitely isn't known for underestimating what technology can do in filmmaking, made a complimentary point from the tentpole side. He said, roughly, if we want to keep making large-scale, effects-heavy films, we have to figure out how to cut VFX costs in half. Not by laying off half the staff at a visual effects company, but by doubling the speed at which artists can complete a shot. Faster cadence, better throughput, artists moving on to the next cool thing and then the next cool thing. So I think the AI story here is not AI writes the screenplay, it's AI lets the human do more of the human work in less time. The creative judgment stays human, and the execution overhead shrinks. Now, does that mean the fear is completely unfounded? No. The whole history of this tool is meant to augment, not replace, in the entertainment industry is not entirely reassuring. Every wave of digital tools has come with the augmentation promise and delivered some version of labor displacement alongside it. The concerns from VFX workers are legitimate and grounded in recent experience. But the specific fear that this deal represents Google secretly planning to generate AI films using A24's brand as cover doesn't really fit the structure of what was announced. Google's financial interest is actually pretty legible. A24 is a studio with a $3.5 billion valuation that just proved it can break through at a scale no one expected from an indie. The equity stake is a bet on that model continuing to work. The AI research is the strategic rationale, and the box office upside is the actual investment thesis. Okay. Let me zoom out now and give you the actual landscape, because this story isn't just about A24 and Google, it's about an entire industry resorting itself around a new set of rules. And the map of who wins and who doesn't is clarifying fast. Think of Hollywood as having 3 tiers. The top tier, franchise tentpoles, Marvel, Disney sequels, Dune. These still require institutional distribution because they require institutional marketing. Opening a film in 4,000 theaters globally is not something a YouTube creator does alone. Disney has made franchise IP the entire logic of its business. Theatrical releases, Disney Plus, theme parks, merchandise, all compounding off the same library. That math still works. Disney's streaming income was up almost 90% year over year in Q2 2026. Toy Story 5 just had the franchise's biggest opening in history. Avengers Doomsday is the next time. The tentpole model isn't dying. Now for the bottom tier, creator-native films. Low budget, specific aesthetic, a director with a demonstrated audience or a sensibility that translates. These never needed the traditional Greenlight because they can find their audience before any institution has to commit. Backrooms and Obsession live here. AI compresses the cost curve at both ends simultaneously. For Disney, faster VFX pipelines reduce the cost of the tentpoles. For Parsons and Baker, AI pre-production tools mean the work that used to require a team of 10 becomes possible for a team of 2. Both benefit. Neither is threatened in the way the discourse suggested. The tier that is genuinely in trouble is the middle. Films too expensive to survive without institutional marketing support and not big enough to carry franchise guarantee economics. Lionsgate's Michael biopic about Michael Jackson ran to $155 million after costly reshoots. Too expensive to survive a soft opening without massive studio support, but not big enough to have the guaranteed audience of an Avengers film. That's the squeeze. And AI isn't saving the middle. AI is compressing the cost of scope, meaning that what used to require $80 million to produce can now be achieved for $30 million, which actually makes the middle more dangerous, not less, because the floor keeps dropping without the ceiling moving. Netflix, interestingly, sits adjacent to this whole story in a way that insulates it. That's because Netflix doesn't depend on theatrical distribution. It is its own distribution channel. So what the creator-native shift does for Netflix is expand the supply of proven content it can acquire after festivals validate it, without Netflix having to bear the development risk. A film validates at TIFF, Netflix buys it. That's a structurally comfortable position. And AMC Theaters is a direct beneficiary of box office recovery regardless of where the films came from. They don't care if the director went to USC or learned on YouTube. They care about seats filled. I want to end today with the question I think the Backrooms Obsession DeepMind story is actually asking, even if it's not saying it out loud. And the question is, what happens to institutions when they lose their information advantage? That's what's really going on here. Hollywood studios held power for a century, not because they had better taste than independent filmmakers. They held power because they controlled distribution, and that control gave them a substitute for actually knowing what audiences wanted. They made guesses, and they made them from a position of power that meant the guesses were never really tested. And YouTube, as we've seen, eroded that. It made taste observable in real time, before the institution had to decide anything. The institutions, we know what audiences want claim, started to look less like expertise and more like incumbency. This pattern is running through a lot of industries right now. For decades, the argument for institutional financial advisors rested on the claim that the institution had better access to information than you did. That claim holds while information is genuinely scarce. It's harder to maintain when the analytical tools are available to anyone willing to learn them. Medicine is going through a version of this. Journalism, education. In each case, AI isn't the cause of the disruption. It's an accelerant of something that was already underway. When institutions lose their information advantage, decisions don't stop being made. Someone still decides what gets made, what gets funded, what gets distributed, what gets recommended to you. The question is just who decides, by what process, and with what accountability. The Greenlight Committee was not a perfect decision-making system. It was biased toward incumbency, toward known IP, toward what had already worked. It produced a particular kind of film and a particular kind of career path, and it excluded a lot of people and a lot of sensibilities that never got the chance to find their audiences. But it was, at least, a legible system. You knew who was making the decision, and you could, in theory, argue with them. So the question worth asking about AI in creative industries and about AI anywhere it shows up at the decision layer is, what could this new system look like? If AI tools help Curry Baker pre-visualize his next film for a fraction of the cost, that's genuine democratization of creative production. But also, if AI recommendation systems determine which films get surfaced to which audiences, that's a new kind of gatekeeping, one that's less visible, not more. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The same technology can lower the barrier to creation while raising the barrier to discovery. It depends entirely on who builds the tools, what they're optimizing for, and what accountability exists for the decisions those tools make downstream. Those are questions that don't have clean answers, which is usually the sign that they're what we should be asking. Thank you to everyone for tuning into this episode of AI IRL. Make sure to follow our podcast and join us on the journey to uncovering the ever-changing role of AI in creating a better future for all. See you next time.